Hi, welcome to Hello Bookseller. Today I'm in Bradford Navan and I'm just here for a little while because I'm going to get the train from here to Dorchester to meet Dorset Bob, and then we're going to be heading out to his place in the Dorset countryside and looking at some books. Okay, so here we are, we're in Puddletown today and I'm with Bob and we've just dropped off to have a look at the antique map and bookshop. Very nice. I hadn't been here since the 70s and this is very much Thomas Hardy country. Really lovely little town. There we go. Nice little exterior that we can browse through. We'll have a look at that now.
How's business? Yes, busy enough. Oh, good.
We're mainly mail order.
Yeah.
Being given out here now, but it works. Which is the main thing.
Yeah, no, absolutely, no. It's if you've got the right.
Review, come on. Yes. No. You can probably smell my cat, can't you?
15.
15.
16 in July.
Right. So here we are at Dorset Bob's new improved alphabetized paperbacks. So they're A to Z by author, which means that shopping for me is a lot quicker, a lot more effective, which means that Bob and I can spend more time in the pub. And as you've seen, we did a little bookshop visit anyway on the way, and it's great. So now if you get in touch with him, he's able to find things a lot more quickly. He still hasn't alphabetized his hardcovers, which is very naughty, but he has done the paperbacks. Now, I've done quite a few videos over the last sort of year and a half since I first visited Bob. I think it's nearly 2 years ago actually, and you'll have seen this before if you watch the channel regularly. If you haven't watched before and this is your first view, you can't visit this warehouse. Bob does have a channel, Mr. Book 451, and he uploads a video every now and again of things he's selling, and you can email him. I'll put the email address in at the bottom of the screen and in the description to the video. You can email if you want, but the beauty of what Bob's got is your science fiction, fantasy, horror, odds and ends, paperbacks, loads in A format, as you can see, right the way through all the decades, and also hardcovers as well. And he also does magazines. So the main thing with Bob's stock, I'll just show you some of the hardcovers, so say these are not alphabetized as yet, is that generally speaking, the condition is absolutely tip top. Okay, so, and his prices obviously vary depending on what you want. There's lots of magazines and digests down here. They do vary, but the real thing is that you're generally getting really good prices and amazing range and real value for money. Because I mean, if you take this Barbara Hambley, as you see, this is one of the few books on this shelf that actually has ripples on the spine. They're mostly unbroken spine. Bob tries to buy only the very best, which is why I buy from him and why I visit, as say, you can't visit. Occasionally Bob will do book fairs. We are talking about a book fair that will probably take place at Morris's office at Zardoz Books. All you need is books, and that will be in his office space in, I think it's the second Saturday or Sunday in September. We're trying to firm that up now. I'll put the dates and things in, and Bob will probably be there selling. This is the first floor of the warehouse. There's all sorts of things up here, just to give you an idea of the paperbacks. And yeah, it's all good clean fun, as you can see. And basically we will all be there. Jules, Bert and I will be there, so the little sort of West Country axis around me, Jules, Bert, Dorset Bob and Morris Zardoz will all be there. But in the meantime, see anything you fancy, or if you can't see what you fancy, get in touch with Bob, he'll sort you out. So there we go. Most excellent. When I get home, you'll see the book haul of what I've picked up, and it's all lovely stuff. So, book buying done, and Bob and I are in the beer garden. We'll have something to eat. We have some chips and some beer, as you do, and a good chat about the old skiffy. And it's such a beautiful day today, it really is. And I came down on the train, as I always do, as you will have seen from earlier in the video. And of course, people are going to Glastonbury Festival, which for those of you not in the UK, is probably the most important, sort of historically important pop and rock festival in Britain. It's more of a pop festival these days because the underground is dead, isn't it? But yeah, so people joined the train at Westbury, which is where Morris Zardoz, All You Need Is Books, is, and then they got off at Castle Carey, and I managed to retain my seat throughout, which was nice. So here's Bob. So Bob and I, we're at the pub, as is our wont, and we've done some horse trading. As I used to call it horse trading when I started the channel, I don't know why. So as I said earlier in the video, if you fancy anything you've seen at Bob's, get in touch. If you fancy something you haven't seen, get in touch. And you've got your own channel now, as I was saying, Mr. Book 451.
Yeah.
Yeah?
I'm just using it to sell books.
Yeah.
So my USP, as I mentioned earlier, if you like to call it that, is that anything I put up in the video will be for sale. I'm not going to tease people with things that are mine.
No, I'll do that on my channel.
But I am at the stage where I am now disposing of large amounts of
books.
My collection.
Yeah.
I mean, stuff that maybe I've had for a while that doesn't mean as much to me as it did when I bought it.
No. But you know, because we're advancing in years. We're still in our prime, of course.
We are.
But I'm sure you said to me the other day that you'd acquired some things for your library. Is that?
Yeah, 1 or 2 bits.
Yeah?
I still get tempted now and again.
Yeah, it doesn't happen very often. But are you prepared to tell us what it was? You don't have to, of course. because I can edit this out. It's just a thing. So.
I picked up. I tell you what, I was
intrigued.
I tell you what, I did pick up that I wasn't expecting to was a book by Ken Bulmer that was under one of his really obscure pseudonyms.
Yeah.
And it's an adventure novel about a crash in the mountains.
Right.
And the survivors having to escape over, or try and get to safety.
Yeah.
Over
So what pseudonym was that?
Do you know, I can't even remember. But it was. That's the kind of thing I actually quite like.
Can we talk about his pseudonyms? Because there's Alan Birdacres, Dre Prescott series, Door. Yeah, we love a bit of Door, and then there was also what else? There's others as well.
There were dozens.
There's that one, because when I bought that copy of Wetted Bronze from you, was that Alan Norville?
Oh yes.
And I said, I don't know this. There's some people on my channel going, "Come on, Steve, it's." So it's one
he did different sort of genres as well.
Yeah.
I mean, he wrote a lot for, I think it was, and somebody would probably correct us on this, but Battle Picture Library and some of those sort of
military comic, like things. Commando. Yeah.
Because back in those days, of course, 50s and 60s, they did. I mean, the writers just wrote. Yeah. No matter what they wrote, they just wrote. Yeah. And they usually wrote science fiction because they enjoyed it.
Yeah.
And Ken, of course, was very much a fan.
Yeah.
He attended as many conventions as he could. He collected fanzines. He wrote fanzines.
Yeah.
Part of the British tradition, and we all like the British tradition.
Very much so. Yeah. It's on that front, reminiscences. When we talked before, and we went through some of your books, and showed some particularly interesting things. You told some stories off camera. And one of the stories was about John Christopher, Seawood. And I think somebody else you mentioned who you said was really, really nice was it Philip E. High?
Yeah, he was a sweetheart.
Philip E. High?
Yeah, real sweetheart. It was funny because he was part of Phil Harbottle's stable of authors. Phil was agenting for people like Ted Tubb, Sid Bounds and Philip E. High.
Yeah.
And Phil used to come down from the north of England, from the northeast, down to the London show, and he would use that as a way of kind of connecting with his authors, talking about deals and what he was agenting for them. And Philip E. High was persuaded to come to one. He'd never been to one before.
What?
And he was the most unassuming chap, and he just came up to me and he said, "Well, are you Bob?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "Oh, I'm Philip E. High, and I've come to meet Phil Harbottle." And he just sat down on a chair next to my stall, and he was so shy. He didn't know anybody there.
That's unusual for old school fandom, isn't it?
He's the loveliest man.
Well, I mean, the thing is Philip E. High. Anybody who can write books with titles like, was it?
Come Hunt and Earth.
Come Hunt and Earth. But you've got a hardcover.
Speaking of dinosaurs.
Speaking of dinosaurs, best book title ever. And is it Run Come See Jerusalem? That's Richard C. Meredith.
That's Meredith.
Yeah, again confused there because they were in Venture. SF. Yeah.
No, but the thing about Phil's books was that a lot of them he wrote for the library market.
Yes. Yeah.
So he wrote for Robert Hale.
Yeah. Yeah.
And interestingly, I remember Sid Bounds telling me the story that
so that's Sidney J. Bounds,
who wrote World Records, and
there was that one we saw earlier on, wasn't it? In Pedaltown, in the bookshop there.
Yes.
Which was published by Fulsham.
Fulsham, he had two by Fulsham, the World Records, and the other one slips my mind now. But he was telling me that as a writer, a jobbing writer, he wrote a lot of westerns.
Yeah.
A lot of his income came from library royalties.
Yeah.
He'd get a check every month, and it was because people were borrowing his books from the library, read them and took them out. And authors get...
authors, unless you're really famous now, authors' library royalties must be tiny now.
Yeah.
I remember Chris Priest and I talking about that and stuff. But it's an interesting thing, isn't it? The library thing has changed.
Well, that's why some of these writers that we grew up, following and reading and whatever, they would write in more than one genre.
Yes, yeah.
They would write westerns, they'd write detective stories, they'd write science fiction.
Yeah.
and again take up pseudonyms.
I mean, that was always the thing from the birth of magazines, wasn't it?
Yes.
Going back a couple of hundred years. You know, people were, I mean, they get called hacks, but people were writers as craftsmen, as workers.
Robert E. Howard is a great example. Boxing stories,
Yeah.
detective stories, obviously the Conan series in Weird Tales.
He's got some really nice Robert E. Howard paperbacks and other things as well. I looked at a really nice, you had a really nice Robert E. Howard hardback, which I fancied. I'm not going to say what it is, because I mean, maybe next time. It was a good price. Yeah.
Well, I am, as I say, I'm doing these videos now where I'm going to try and make them more regular.
Yes, yeah.
Of sales videos, and they're going to be themed.
Thematic,
so
yeah.
The last one I did was the Moorcock one.
Yeah, that was great.
I'm planning others with those kind of common themes.
Yeah.
Not necessarily single author, but
I think I'm looking forward to it, because whenever I visit your place, it's always just for a few hours, and I've usually got a few things in mind. Like today, I had a stack of things ready, which you put aside for me, and I pulled some more things off, and I saw other things, and I thought, right, remember them for next time. And so you probably get an email from me in a few days saying keep those for me. But also, you know, the theme thing, you know, you have moods, don't you, when you collect and you read, and like today I was very much in an upgrading sort of mood, as you'll see when you see the rest of this video when I do the book haul. But also, I think the one which I'm most looking forward to, that you've talked about, so we've talked about a few ideas today, will be when you do the book covers one.
yeah,
Favourite book covers.
yeah.
Books for sale which have great covers.
And this is your fault, by the way, Steve, because you were the one that,
Everything is my fault.
you were the one that kept nagging me to put things in alphabetical order. So I did what Uncle Steve told me to do, was to put them in alphabetical order, which took me only about a month.
We were
every
emailing,
evening for a month.
Yeah. Every night I get home from work and there was an email saying, I'm up to H now.
It was the biggest job I've ever taken on. But what it did get me to do was to really look at books that have been
What you've
sitting
got.
in boxes, whatever. Because I've been buying books for years and years and years.
Yeah.
And they just went in boxes. I'm not on the internet. Well, I'm now, but
Yeah.
I was never sort of big into all that on the internet. So there are books there that have been there for years and years and years. And I kept seeing covers and thinking, oh my goodness, that's amazing. And it's probably a book I don't want to read by an author that I'm not interested in, but I just bought it because the cover's so wonderful.
Yeah.
And I'm just planning to do just a
We
little
all do
one
it.
where maybe all the books would be for sale, but I don't really want to sell them.
We talked about this earlier on, didn't we, about my theory that every book I buy I'm going to read.
Yeah.
But it's a theory.
Yeah, it's a theory, yeah. And also
It'll probably stay a theory.
there's
as
people
well.
in our lives that we will tell that we say,
Oh,
oh no,
yes.
I'm going to read that.
Yeah.
I haven't just bought that and put it on a shelf. No.
Well, one of the beauties of upgrading or buying multiple editions of books you love is you don't have to read them because you've already read them.
Exactly. So, yes, upgrading, yeah. And you can always have the excuse that you're bringing one book in, but by definition, one's going to go out.
Do you know, I've just remembered, I'm glad you said, because I've just remembered that I said last week in work and at home, and this is where the problem comes, I've said it at home, that from now on I'm going to have a one in, one out policy. And I bought some books from you today, and I bought some books from Hay yesterday, which you've seen in the previous video. And, oh God, I mean, so I've got to get rid of more.
You've got to get rid of more. And it becomes quite a job.
It is quite a job.
It's like, which of my children am I going to let go?
Just complaining about having all these great books. Everybody's terrible. Well, thanks for that, Bob. That's a night, just to give you a flavour of this. We're going to, chat on a luxury age. We're sitting here in Dorset at the back of a lovely pub, and we're having some drinks and
it's warm.
chips. And it's warm. It's brilliant.
It's lovely.
It's never warm in the UK. It's a funny thing. I talk on my channel about I'm going to do more things when I go out and about and walk, and you'll see them. And of course, the weather's always crap in the UK, but there we are. Anyway, Bob, it's great to see you, man.
And you.
It really is.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Till the next time.
It's the day after I visited Bob, and it was very hot on the train coming back. It has to be said, and it was delayed for half an hour. So I was sitting on one platform for half an hour and it's blazing away. And I was actually reading some sections from these two books which I got from Bob. So I'm going to talk you through my haul. And as I say, Bob had some stuff ready for me, but there were lots of other nice things as well. And because, as you saw and as I said in the earlier part of the video, he's now alphabetized his paperback stock, it was a real joy to go through, and I could do it much more quickly than normal. So what you see before you are two Playboy Press paperbacks celebrating Galaxy magazine. I've never seen these before, And basically they have stories, they have editorial introductions by Frederick Pohl, which are really interesting, and they've got some memoirs where some of the contributors talk about Galaxy magazine, particularly about Horace Gold, who's name checked there, the original sort of editor. And really, really good, because Gold was a controversial figure. Some people really didn't like working with him. You know, he was agoraphobic. He would change the titles of stories. He would change the text. He would talk to writers during the making of stories, and sometimes he'd talk them out of things and wreck their psychic sort of experience of what they were doing. Sometimes it worked really, really well. Some writers loved him, some hated him, some had a love-hate thing with him. But overall, he was of great benefit to Galaxy magazine. And the thing was, Galaxy came around in the early 50s and was the first serious challenger alongside the magazine of fantasy and science fiction, which started a bit earlier. I think that started about 47. And the starting of a magazine of fantasy and science fiction is really why some of us say that the golden age ended in 1946. And the golden age really means the dominance in terms of editorial standards and what made a genre SF story that came from John W. Campbell's editorship of Astounding. And really, by this point, by the early 50s, Campbell was getting crankier and crankier and was insisting on certain things. He had the Manifest Destiny thing where, you know, mankind always had to beat the aliens, and there always had to be psi powers, and the person with psi powers had to be in charge and come out on top in the end, all that stuff. And he couldn't cope with people like Philip K. Dick and some of the younger, newer writers who were coming through, who had a more literary bent and a more satiric bent, and who were reacting against the McCarthyite anti-communism thing, because of course at that point people were getting blacklisted in Hollywood for once having attended maybe one Communist Party meeting. And Gold really sort of worked with people like Damon Knight, Judith Merrill, Sheckley, Dick, William Tenn, loads of others, and particularly with Alfred Bester. And the input that Horace Gold put into The Demolished Man is just incredible. You know, and you can read about it in these and this. Oh, that's what I really love reading. I sometimes love reading that stuff more than the stories themselves and getting the historical stuff. But there are lots of great stuff in Galaxy, and the good thing about these is that they have stories which are famous by people who are well known, but they also have oddities. Like, for example, in one of these, there's a story by the actor Alan Arkin, who only ever wrote 2 or 3 stories, and his first one was an SF story, which is just amazing. You know, you pick up these little obscurities. Brilliant, brilliant thing to see. So I read a lot of the supplemental material on the train on the way back, and Galaxy really changed things. It really did usher in, you know, the new social SF, the soft sciences, the coming forward of dystopian backgrounds as a key indicator of genre SF. I mean, before that, Campbell wasn't having that so much, and dystopias are very common in the SF in the mainstream, like 1984, Brave New World, what have you. But it wasn't something so prevalent in genre SF, in magazine-based SF. And that really came through in Galaxy, and people like Paul and Kornbluth, Philip K. Dick, Sheckley, and others really used to use that to make social commentary about the times they lived in, and that really made the difference. And when I'm in work now, people say, I really like dystopias, what should I read? And I say to them, well, a good 80% of science fiction published between 1950 and now have dystopian backgrounds. It's one of the givens, it's one of the basic paradigms of SF. When you get that paradigm shift into a different world in the first sort of few lines of the book, sometimes in the first sentence, it's dystopia is an important thing. You look at Philip K. Dick, they're nearly all dystopian, or they're alternate societies which posit on strange things, and that's where Paul and Kornbluth was so important, really. So I was really pleased to get these. Absolutely gorgeous. Thanks, Bob. Then a couple of Gary Kilworth's, his 2 mainstream novels from the late 80s, The Sublime Witchwater Country and The Marvellous Spiral Winds. And I have both of these in hardcover first and Bodley Head, but this was the first edition of Witchwater I bought and read before I got the hardcover. Great Bradbury-esque thing, very much like Dandelion Wine, except it's set in East Anglia, on the Fens, very flat part of England, where there's a lot of marshy country, and Spiral Winds is set in the Middle East, and they're great. He did other mainstream things a little bit later, but these were his first 2, and for me these are his best books by far. And I talked about them in my, I think it's top 10 or top 15 associational SF, where I look at mainstream novels by SF writers. And you don't see these very often. And when you do, they're always in a state. And I know I don't have that edition of Spiral Winds. I think I might have that edition of Witchwater, but again, I wasn't going to leave them there. They're really, really nice books. If you ever see these, pick them up. They're fantastic novels on any level, and they probably represent Gary at his most ambitious, and it's a real shame that they weren't more commercially successful, because he really does deserve more attention. Fantastic novels on any level. Then a couple of beautiful old late 60s, early 70s Panthers. Two classic books in this very similar tradition, from two absurdist SF writers, two of the greatest in the school of Mark Twain, Sheckley, George Saunders now I think is very much in that sort of ballpark. And in between all those people came Kurt Vonnegut and John SLadic, and this is Vonnegut's first novel, of course, Player Piano. And I do have a nice American trade paperback of Player Piano. I think I might even have a later Granada with a black livery. That was certainly the one I had originally. So again, maybe I'll end up with 3 copies, but the trade paperback, this will probably go now. But that's such a stunning jacket, and I love, it's got the oblate there, the flattened sphere down in the corner there. So that's an earlier one, a 60s one. And this had a different title. It was Utopia something and a number. I can't think what it is. I'll try and flash it up on the screen. But absolutely beautiful. I think you'll agree. Lovely, and typical of the sort of thing that Bob manages to pick up on his travels to sell to us, the great unwashed SF fans out there. And SLadic, well, what can you say? This is fantastic. I mean, I've got a first edition of this, which I think is Cape or Hutchinson. Really, really nice sort of pop-out jacket. And this is about a guy who has his consciousness fed into a computer, downloaded into a computer. And, you know, this is the 60s, so this is like proto-cyberpunk stuff, proto-VR, so it's quite important. And SLadic was very sort of odd character, obsessed with game theory, parody and pastiche. And, you know, he doesn't fit well with everybody. I mean, the reproductive system, aka Mechasm, was probably his most famous book, and that was his first. This was his second novel, I think. His second novel as himself. He did things with Tom Dish under pseudonyms, collaborative novels. I think this was his second full-blown SF novel. And yeah, I'm taking a price sticker off the back here. I'm compelled. But that was so beautiful that even though I've got a hardcover first, I had to have that because it's such a nice looking book. And of course it's new wave, so it's really important. He moved over to the UK from the US to become part of the New World stable. Really key stuff. Never met the guy. I would love to have done so. And he became more of an obscure figure. And he died relatively young. I think he was only in his early 60s. Great shame. And the Muller-Fokker Effect. Great title. Aren't they absolutely beautiful? It's just Panther, the gold standard. Children's books. It was only 2 days ago I was in Hay, and I picked up the second and third of the Earthsea trilogy in this livery, and I said I'd been looking for them for a while in really good condition, and Bob has got the first one, so I picked that up off Bob, and really, really pleased. So that's just again the joy of serendipity and chance. You just come across things. It's so different to shopping online where you're searching, or you might come across things, and of course you can see what the quality is like, and of course with Bob the quality is just always stunning, and the prices are great as well. So I was really pleased. So I've got the trilogy in that livery, which I've always wanted. Fantastic stuff. Of course I could have bought them back in the day when they were in print like that, but of course I didn't, you know, young and foolish. And we have Susan Cooper's Seawood. I remember selling it in that particular jacket design. And Susan Cooper, of course, wrote The Darkest Rising sequence. Fantastic children's fantasy novels, really good, particularly Oversea and Understone, the first one, which I think is really underrated. And yeah, absolutely beautiful illustration, really nice and puffin. And this has, I think, supernatural elements, but I saw it there and that really took me back to the 80s, and just a beautiful book. So I thought Steve's having that one. So some nice children's books for my little puffin collection. A random trio, left to right, Colin Greenland's Other Voices in Unwin. I've got a hardcover first of it with a totally different jacket, also Unwin, but this is typical of the wonderful sort of livery that Jane Johnson had designed for Unwin there. And there's Colin on the back. So he doesn't do any writing these days. Great shame. Certainly not fiction anyway. And his partner, of course, is Susanna Clarke. who wrote Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, and Piranesi. I think Piranesi, which was a smash a couple of years ago, is being made into a Netflix or Amazon TV series or film or something. And yeah, it's a shame because Colin really good, and he wrote Take Back Plenty, of course, wonderful space opera from the late 80s, and wonderful book he wrote called The Entropy Exhibition about New Wave SF, which is really hard to come by now. I bought mine new back in the 80s. And yeah, she really tried to make things look different, very elegant, ornate, literary fantasy, singleton, none of this endless series stuff, really beautiful. And I saw that and that really took me back. And there weren't many books with this sort of livery. There was some M. John Harris and the Ice Monkey, Songbirds of Pain by Gary Kilworth. There were a few others. There's a Tanith Lee, which is short stories which I have in hardcover. Absolutely gorgeous and absolutely stunning. I mean, she really tried to make them look different. And this was the same time as Gollancz were doing the classic SF series in B format with a white livery as well, which again didn't catch on because the specialist shops wanted A format. And these are all A format, of course. But you just don't get that sort of innovative paperback jacketing anymore. To be fair, Penguin's classic SF they did recently with the white and purple livery have been really nice. You know, they've really sort of broken the mold there and people like them. But, you know, it's good to see people trying to escape from the usual pulpy sort of covers, which we love. But it was great to see something more modernist and interesting and literary and classy looking. It really, really was. And when we're talking about class in the middle there, we have Anticipations, edited by Christopher Priest, my old mate, no longer with us, sadly. Absolutely mint copy. I've got a hardcover first of this, which he signed for me at the Worldcon 87. My copy's also signed, I think, by Brian Aldiss, maybe a couple of others. But I didn't actually have this one. I used to have one years ago, and it was in a total state. And I've been watching out for a mint one, and gorgeous. And as you see, no picture, nice and plain, and just beautiful. I mean, Chris had that thing where he said, if it was up to me, my books would just have my name, the title, and plain covers, and he loved that. So I bet he really dug that cover. We never talked about that cover, but I mean, look at the iconography, pan science fiction, the pan logo, the double lozenge, the neon type effect there on the blue and red. Gorgeous. I mean, one day all books will look this way. Well, they won't, but if ever I get to start my imprint, and God would I love to do that, that's how they look. They'll be really sleek, and of course nobody will buy them, but there you go. What can you do? Then a little late novella from Robert Silverberg, Letters from Atlantis, which you don't see very much, in Questar. And I don't think this was ever published in the UK. And I've had my eyes on a hardcover one on eBay. And it was in the States, so the postage is expensive. So I thought, if I buy that one from Bob for a few quid, then that will prevent me from spending an excessive amount of money on a hardcover. And, you know, my love for Silverberg grows and grows, as you know. And I'm getting closer to completism. Am I going to go that way? I keep saying no. I'm just picking them up as I see them, really. And I bought quite a few recently, as you will have seen. So that was really nice to get. So lovely. Again, falling into the I couldn't leave it behind category with these two beautiful pan lozenges of two of Richard Cowper's books. I say Cowper, it was Cooper, but we say Cowper just so that you remember the spelling when you're searching for them, if you're searching online. Of Clone and Profundis, two of his funniest books, two of his most successful books. Absolutely stunning cover art there, absolutely gorgeous, lovely. I think you'd agree. It's Ian Pollock, I think, is the artist. Great stuff. He used to do lots of work for all sorts of publishers back in those days. And I have these, and I've had several copies, and I think these should be upgrades. I've had really horrible copies for a long time. I think I upgraded at least one of them. So again, I'll be deduping and passing them on. And these are great mid-70s British satirical SF. Not for every taste. I mean, I think of the three C's in British SF of that period. There's D.G. Compton, who is the master, Richard Cowper, and Michael Coney. And even though Cowper really is a better writer than Coney, and his best book, The Twilight of Briareus, is really quite something, I'm actually in some ways fonder of Coney, and Cooper doesn't always do it for me. I always want him to be a bit stronger, but at his best, I mean, he did a great Keith Roberts light in The Road to Corley, things like that, and he did some great stuff. I mean, Twilight of Briareus is really good, but he never quite did it for me in the way the others did, but nonetheless, a writer you really should track down. Now we get on to the real meat, the hardcovers, and this, I'll just show you this briefly. I've taken out the bag, and Bob is so good at bagging things, and I've made a real hash of putting it back into a bag. This is a great anthology, and it's had numerous sort of paperback editions over the years, and I do have one. And this is the Science Fiction Hall of Fame Volume 1, and it covers short stories from 1929 to 1964. These stories were voted on by the Science Fiction Writers of America in the late 60s, and they founded the Nebula Award. And there are also things which they asked Silverberg to adjudicate on. And the stories in this are just amazing. If you go right the way back, the earliest story in this is from 1934, and it's Stanley G. Weinbaum's Martian Odyssey. And you read that, and it's just as good as a lot of the popular SF that's being published now. You know, it's 90 years old. 1929 was the beginning of the qualifying date, and 64 was the closing. And there's just all sorts of brilliant stuff in here. I'm actually going to do a video about this book at some point. And there were 3 other volumes. The second one is novellas. They were split up into a number of paperbacks. But to get it in hardcover, absolutely fantastic. And I could sit down with this anytime and read it all the way through. This is a proper education in what genre science fiction was, particularly in America, in that period from 29 to 64. There are things in there I'm not fond of. There are things in there which I think are overrated, but there's also a lot of really brilliant one-offs in there. I mean, I'll never be that enamored of Lester Del Rey, Helen O'Loy. I mean, he's never done it for me. People seem to love it. I didn't like Nerves either. I don't like what he did to fantasy by getting the Terry Brooks Tolkien rip-off thing going and causing the fantasy boom, which caused the money to be leached away from science fiction in publishers' budgets and over to fantasy, and we end up with the massive bloated things we've got today. But there's lots of great stuff in here as well. I mean, you look at the names: Bradbury, Clark, Asimov, Matheson, Sturgeon, Selazny, Daniel Keyes. Really amazing stuff. You know, if you only ever buy one pure genre SF anthology, you probably should buy this. If you're going to buy a new wave anthology, you want to buy something like The New Tomorrows by Norman Spinrad, or probably the New SF, I would say, by Langdon Jones, are the 2 new wave ones to get. Way ahead of Dangerous Visions, quite frankly. But if you're going to buy a pure genre SF anthology with short stories, this is the one to get. I'll be passing on my paperback copy, and I might try and get the rest of the series in hardcover. Gorgeous. So let's have a little bit of Arkham House. Yes, Arkham House. You're thinking about H.P. Lovecraft and weird fiction and that sort of thing, and before you, you're seeing some SF. Can such things be? Well, of course they can, because in the 80s, Arkham really sort of branched out, and they did a lot of really great SF, mostly by the newer writers who were coming up in that decade. And that's what you're seeing here. You're seeing Crystal Express by Bruce Sterling, which has this wonderful fractal design cover. And I do have a Hutchinson Legend edition as well. Look at that. Isn't that gorgeous? And this is Bruce's first short story collection. What can you say about that? How cyberpunk is that? It's just so cool. And I've always fancied that edition, so I now have 2 editions. Sometimes for the Arkham House ones, the texts are different from other publishers. I don't think that's the case for that one, but I need to look into that. And then something which has been a absence in my library for quite some time, and that, as you see, is The Ends of the Earth by Lucius Shepard, which was his second short story collection for Arkham. And there it is. Isn't that absolutely stunning? Artwork, I think, by J.K. Potter, who used to be really famous then. You never hear much about now, but obviously he used elements of photography and collage there. And he did the cover for the Arkham House edition of The Jaguar Hunter, which was Shepard's first collection. This is later stuff, so this is early 90s, and there's going to be a lot in there I haven't read, and I haven't neglected later Shepard. The early stuff I've all read, and he's just amazing. He's such a good writer, proper literary writer. Flashes of Green and Conrad, and also of people like Silverberg, Bradbury. You can see all the influences in there, but he always had his own voice, and he was a late starter. He didn't start publishing until his 30s, rather like William Gibson, and I think that was why he didn't grow up in public in the same way. And Arkham from this period, gorgeous. They did lots of lovely things. They did Memoirs of the Space Age by J.G. Ballard. They did some Greg Bear. They did a Barry Malzberg collection later on, and they're all lovely. Michael Bishop, great stuff. So the Arkham House SF some of which is relatively easy to get. Some of them now are nudging the 50 quid mark or more, are well worth your attention. But I think you'll agree they're absolutely stunning, aren't they? Gorgeous. Okay, serious major upgrade time. This was something which I'd wanted to get upgraded for a long time. I generally don't upgrade my hardcovers because I generally don't buy hardcovers unless they're at least near fine. And I had a copy of the Chalk Giants, which is in such a state that in some areas the jacket art had been rubbed away and all that was left is some of the laminate. And Bob had this spare copy. This wasn't cheap. It's a very important book to me, Hutchinson first edition. And the copy I had was probably my worst quality hardcover in my collection. And interestingly enough, it had been rebound and cut. So it looked like an octavo when it should have been a demi, and this is a full demi. And I just love that artwork. And of course, that's Korth Castle there, which some of the novel is set in. And if you watch my first Keith Roberts video, where I visit a lot of the locations of Pavan and the Chalk Giants, you see me at Korth Castle and fantastic stuff. This is a brilliant book. It's not for beginners. It's quite advanced. It was Roberts' most advanced and challenging book of the 60s and 70s, in my opinion. And it's episodic and fragmentary, and it starts with a looming sort of nuclear apocalypse coming, and then it goes into other sections and you can't tell whether they're in the past or the future, and it's just absolutely amazing. And it's not as the easiest book to read, but for me it's one of the most rewarding. If you've read Pavan, you should probably, and loved it, you should probably read Kite World next, or some of the early ones like The Furies. But this for me is one of the sort of highlights of his career. Absolutely stunning, and I'm so pleased to have it in a decent copy, and it's a first, which is brilliant. And we finish with some lovely 1980s hardcovers, and all really beautiful. And one of these I bought purely for nostalgia, and that's Stephen Dawson's Daughter of Regals, which is a singleton, and I've never read it. I used to sell it back in the day. Bob had a couple of these actually. He had one that was spine faded as Collins. Lovely, lovely artwork, and I remember selling that, and that takes me back to when I was young and, you know, really sort of happy in my early days in the job and really enjoying it, the buzz of what was going on, even though a lot of the big stuff was fantasy. Lots of great SF stuff was going on, things like Neuromancer and the Gollancz sort of first paperbacks that they did, and all kinds of other stuff, you know, KW Jeter, Lucius Shepard. Amazing sort of time in SF, and there were big blockbusters from people like Asimov. The last Asimov books, the Dune books, are selling really well, and Ian Banks came along. Really exciting time, and you know, it's great to have these. And you see here Lord Valentine's Castle in the UK first edition. Not one of my favourite Silverbergs, but very important, and that's Gollancz, and this is signed apparently. I haven't opened this yet, but Bob tells me it's signed, and absolutely gorgeous. So that was a big omission. I have read it. As I say, it's not my favourite books. I think I put it in my 100 must-read fantasy, because it is a fantasy. It's set in another planet, but it has real magic in it. It's supernatural, so it's fantasy, not SF. Science fantasy, if you will. And just to finish off, a really, really nice late 80s Grafton, Phyllis Eisenstein, Sorcerer's Son, which I've always wanted to read. I've read about it, never got around to it. And this was one of a diptych. There's a second one, I can't think what it's called. And I've always been interested in that one. And it's got that classic, lovely royal format. You see that it's bigger than the other books. And Grafton really went for the royal format in the late 80s. And gorgeous, gorgeous stuff. And I am looking forward to reading that. I don't know when I'll get around to it. So that's the end of my haul from Bob. I hope you've enjoyed that. And as I say, get in touch with him with the means I've indicated in the description and throughout the video. And I'm sure he'll sort you out for some nice stuff as well. So this is Outlaw Bookseller signing out for now. Thanks for your views and support, and I'll see you again soon. Bye.